Hey, reality. All right, so for this one, over on my Vimeo channel before, I've talked a little bit about this idea of disease and things like bacteria and viruses and parasites and stuff like that. But I want to cover it a little bit more as I've had some more time to think about it on the YouTube channel. And generally, the idea comes down to this idea as disease as basically some form of body impurity. I mean, because you can look at a lot of the diseases that do exist, and many to almost all of them that we kind of know the really fundamental cause come down to basically some form of body impurity. Like a large section of them come down to viruses. Basically, these kind of nano to maybe micro scale objects that basically get inside of you and then actually can get inside of individual cells themselves and change the way those cells behave, the way those cells acknowledge information, the way those cells in some sense kind of perceive and see the world around them. They identify parts of the body incorrectly and things like that. Then similarly, there's another scale up. There's things like bacteria, things that are more on that kind of like micro to milliscale, that basically, I think micro is probably a limit, that again are on the order of cells themselves and actually, can attack and change cells. They can actually substitute themselves for cells, all kinds of stuff. Plus, they can act as carriers for viruses as well. They can kind of use viruses basically as like a toolbox to basically then attack and change cells to digest information or matter or whatever. And so then the thought is, well, okay, so if a lot of these things basically behave this way, and there's kind of this fundamental basis in reality that basically we are all some form of basically ring boundary between basically these outer and inner states, then, perhaps all of these things are actually some form of body impurity. And that's really, it's kind of like a matter of scale difference, and it's a matter of where they're basically attacking or attaching within the body is the kind of behavior that they basically induce. And then basically the things that we do basically induce certain types to go to certain places. If you drink a lot of sugar, then basically it's going to end up sending a lot of stuff down to your kidneys, because that's where all the kind of action's taking place. You're spending a lot of basically body energy and you're basically transforming a lot of sugar and things like that, and so everything kind of naturally goes there because that's where everything's happening. Similarly, like if you smoke, you're basically you're ingesting particulates and stuff into your lungs. You're basically causing kind of damage sites within your lungs, and so then things could basically go in and basically start latching onto those damage sites. It's like if you've taken away your body's kind of natural protectiveness or done something to it, then basically things can attack it and attach on. Because I had noticed this like when we were in meetings and things like that when I was working in the government, I would notice that there would be these kind of weird coughs that would travel around the room, and then when they would get near me, then suddenly, I'd feel like an itch or like, I'd feel something like on my skin, or I would feel that kind of urge to cough as well. But it would be kind of like a tickle in the throat and things like that. And I'd be like, what the hell? I would notice that, around our work environment, there would be kind of like a motile dust almost. Dust that would just kind of like appear and things like that and be like, wow, people have like, dandruff that kind of like leaps away from them and stuff. But, after a while, I kind of got to this thought, well, maybe actually it's that there really are a lot of these kind of very small scale things that we just kind of don't acknowledge basically as being threats in our local environment. Stuff that we kind of think of as it's dust or something like that. But, in fact, it is a small thing that is, again, trying to basically get at us, because we're a good source of energy. We have basically like warm environments. We have kind of nice, like moist, wet environments. I mean, we have all these areas that are basically, great for basically stuff to, kind of feast on. Plus, we have all these like active blood sources and stuff that are very easy to get to. And plus we've got a lot of kind of easy openings and places where it's easy to kind of to miss stuff or to basically to not be able to fully get it. Like your ears and your nose and all kinds of stuff like that. And so then basically these things, they get inside and basically change you. And what's even more interesting is, what if some of the ones that we think of as mental diseases, where people have either strange mental desires or strange mental behaviors, they have kind of these like compulsions that come out of nowhere and stuff like this. In some sense, well, what if that is also basically a form of impurity, like a physical impurity? I mean, because as a society and as a people, we already have this idea basically of, when we sleep, we're basically letting the dust settle. But what if that is really us almost talking to this idea that there is dust? I mean, it's like fine scale, basically, creatures or objects, that basically get attached to certain points within us change our actual chemicals and the information that's transferred through our nerve pathways, which in some sense is kind of like changing how we feel. You could basically induce emotion effectively. If you got the wrong one attaching to something, you'd be like, oh, now I have an incredible craving for, some basically type of food, some type of indulgence, things like that. Or, in some cases like these kind of irrational rages. But again, it would be like you would almost have a thing that's like rage, 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 and it would be a cause of both a physical thing, which is then inducing basically a spiritual, I guess, change in the person themselves. But, you've got both. And in some sense, actually, behaviors that we think of as bad in many ways would then induce these. Having high lust would basically expose you to a lot of basically kind of these sexual parasites. If you've got a lot of greed, then basically you usually end up collecting a lot of stuff, and then that stuff often collects a lot of basically junk to go along with it. It's like these people who are kind of hoarders in their house basically just becomes like a big mess and stacks of stuff. And oftentimes when you go inside, they're just despicably filthy. It's like you clean out one of these houses and you find like, rat droppings and stuff underneath. And it's like, in some sense, you're introducing disease into your own home by basically the desire to have all this kind of crap. Similarly, like pride, you desire the response and adoration and love of people and kind of, what they feel about you. So, you put yourself around people. Because it's hard to get that if you're not around people. But then, the problem is then by being around people, you're exposing yourself to all their coughs, all their flus, all this kind of stuff. But then, at the same point, it's like, well, okay, but you can't be a part of society if you don't find something that's like an equitable balance between that. Somewhere where you have exposed yourself to stuff enough to be able to basically fight it off. But, then you yourself are kind of like keeping yourself clean, keeping your environment clean, all this kind of stuff, which then basically keeps it away from you. Because, you often find that like a lot of these OCD people, at least around their houses and stuff, they themselves actually don't suffer a lot of like colds, a lot of like the really kind of like bad flu season stuff when it comes through. It's like, well, maybe that's because basically they're keeping a lot of this away by basically, kind of maintaining their cleanliness / purity level, if we were game characters, within their local environment. Because in a lot of way, our local environment is also kind of a reflection of ourself. If your house is a mess, then often you are a mess. Similarly, if your car is, then often you are. It's, this whole association with like, guys in their cars and their wangs. Same deal. It's like, if your car is kind of a destroyed mess that's always breaking down, well, then you're probably going to be having a hard time too. I don't know. Anyways, but mostly, again, the main chief point is this thought about, well, taking a step back and thinking, we have a lot of evidence that a lot of diseases and a lot of things that are wrong with people are based on basically external impurities getting inside of them or external organisms. So then, what if a larger set of the ones that we haven't really figured out yet actually have that as a base cause?